Same thing here. They came to Israel to help the Jews cultivate the land. You know what they call themselves today? Palestinians. They are not indigenous to Israel. Very few are. But in some of the key cities in the West Bank, none of them are indigenous to this land. So anybody who's telling you that there was a Palestine and Palestinians and people who lived here for history, from the beginning of history, and the Jews came to steal the land, BS. Didn't happen. The Ottoman Empire, and they very quickly not only conquered the Middle East, but they went as far as Vienna in Europe. And they treated Israel as just a passing, like a bridge to Africa, using the highways. That was the idea. That was the idea of the train that we talked about. You know, everything here in Israel was meaningless. In fact, Israel remained with no trees at all, because they used everything live, like something that could be used for energy, like fire, and they destroyed everything. The guides maybe didn't tell you this, but over 90% of the trees living in Israel, forests, are planted. None of them are natural growing. They need to replenish the land. So the empire, this empire, was here for a long time. Made the wrong choice, went with Germany in World War I, lost the war, and now comes the deal between Britain and France, known as the Sykes-Picot. We heard about it a few times already during the time that we visited the country. And that was a decision how to draw lines on the map of the Middle East and create nations. Until then, there were no nations. The whole thing was just one big mess of land. No names to countries, no nationalities, no nothing. It was Ottoman Empire. Now, what these people did not take into account is, who are these people who live in here? This is not one group of people. Iraq has about 36 or 37 different tribes. And then came a man that hardly acknowledges Judaism, Benjamin Herzl, who had a vision to create a place for the Jews to come back to. Because, my friends, there wasn't one nation in Europe that in one time or another did not expel the Jews from their nation, even Great Britain. So he was an interesting fellow, very secular, who saw the incident of Alfred Dreyfus, the famous trial in France. Émile Zola wrote about it quite a bit and said, look, it's terrible. A man is being accused, he was found not guilty after that, but there was a mockery. And he said, there's got to be something here for the Jews, and he created the Zionist movement. That was in 1896. Okay? What was in 1896 in Israel? One big zero. There were hardly any Jews, just those that were never expelled from here by, throughout the Bible. There were a few Arabs living in. By the way, Mark Twain says there were more Jews then living in Jerusalem than Muslims. Mark Twain also said that the first time he ever saw stone eating goats, because there was no grass anywhere. So there was nothing here. Swamps, malaria, nothing. Only after Benjamin Herzl came with the idea, he also looked for Money. Money makes the world go round. And the Ottoman Empire needed money. So he came to the Pasha, the controller of the Ottoman Empire, and said, how much do you want for pieces of land? And he started to buy land. When we came from Tel Aviv to Haifa, when we were climbing up to the Carmel, on the buses, probably your guides told you that all this land was bought by the Rothschild family. Rothschild family. Later on was given to the State of Israel. As a matter of fact, 94% of all the land in the State of Israel belong to the government. Why? Because biblically, we can't own land. Biblically, the land belongs to the tribes of Israel, and every Jubilee year they go back to the original. We don't know who the original are, so when we buy a piece of land, even if it's an apartment, we actually lease it for 99 years. It's 49 years plus 49 years, and that's how we do it. So you don't own your land, you lease it, but it keeps itself renewed. Now, Jews, like any other group of people, at the turn of the century, last century, started to migrate. Many Italians came to New York, right? Many Polish people came to New York. Many Jews came to New York. Where would you go? Would you go to Israel, malaria and sands and dunes and what? What are you going to find in Israel? So most Jews that immigrated from Europe with the bigger migration went to the New World and established themselves there. A few came here. And there was a nationalistic atmosphere all of a sudden created by this Zionist movement, and people started to say, shameful not to come to Israel. And some took it seriously and came to Israel and started to settle in what? There were no cities. The cities could not handle too many people. So they established little settlements, and they called it kibbutz, where people sit there like in a commune. You know, the hippies would have loved it in the 60s. A commune. You know, we share it, even the children. Even the children didn't stay with the parents. They stayed in the children's home. And the parents used to go to visit them in the afternoon. Why? Because they were busy cultivating the land. It was agricultural society. And then came a little bit more advanced situation, and they call it moshav. So it's not 100% owned by everybody. The houses actually belong to you, but the land belongs to everybody. What I'm trying to tell you here, it was like commonality, common effort to establish something. But what did the Jews do in Europe? They weren't allowed to do very much. Obviously, they weren't fighters. They weren't allowed to own ammunition or guns or any of that stuff. They came here, tax collectors, I guess, accountants, in the legal field, doctors, many doctors, especially from Germany. How do you become a doctor that now works the land? It's a little bit peculiar, right? One day you opening up somebody and remove an appendix, and the next day you have a shovel and you try to cultivate the land. It doesn't work. Well, what happens when you settle and you need workers? People realize that there's money to be made. So people from Syria and Lebanon and Iraq and Egypt and all our wonderful neighbors started to come to Israel as temporary dwellers, like Mexicans who come to America and become dreamers, and started to help the Jews cultivate the land because they knew how to do it. There were no doctors, there were no accountants, there were no lawyers. They knew how to work the land, and the Jews were helped by them. But if you ask them then, who are you? They would say, we're from Iraq, so we're Iraqis. Are you ever going to go back there? I guess they would have said yes. In 1948, there were about 650,000 Israelis living in Israel, Israeli Jews living in Israel, and there were about the same number, a little bit more, maybe Arabs living in the same territory called Israel, or Palestine then. The British mandate, I don't have to repeat everything because you know what I mean. The British mandate, once they decided how to divide the lands, Israel and Transjordan, that was one country by the way, was under the British mandate. They controlled the land. French controlled Syria and Lebanon. They were here, and come a point where they got fed up because Jews wanted to come to Israel. World War II, a lot of Jews could have been saved. By the way, I found out that my own father was working for Mossad at that time, that its entire job was to find escape route for Jews to Israel and immigrate them to Israel illegally, and that was it. So we started the country here with about the same number of people. Jews were expelled from the Arab lands, and before long, from 650,000 people that lived here in 1948, in 1953, there were about 2.5 million of them Jews. Now, how do you sustain 4 times the number of people that you started with when there's nothing here? No industry, no nothing. Same thing here. They came to Israel to help the Jews cultivate the land. You know what they call themselves today? Palestinians. They are not indigenous to Israel. Very few are. But in some of the key cities in the West Bank, none of them are indigenous to this land. So anybody who's telling you that there was a Palestine and Palestinians and people who lived here for history, from the beginning of history, and the Jews came to steal the land, BS. Didn't happen. Now, at the end of 1948, the West Bank line and the Gaza line were dictated by an agreement between Israel and those countries. Actually, somebody sat there and made a line in green pencil. That's why it's called today the Green Line. Honestly, that's why it's called the Green Line. And here and there, somebody also wasn't very good with their hands, so that part became no man's land, because nobody could have agreed. By the way, Latrun was one of these places. So now you have a situation where the West Bank belongs to the Palestinians? No, there's no such thing. It belongs to Jordan, right? King Jordan. And Gaza belongs to Egypt. Nobody talks Palestine yet. There's no such thing. The idea of a national entity for the people who lived in these areas did not exist at all. It was a non-issue. When did it become an issue?
1972.
In 1967, the 6 Days War. I was in it. I remember it like it was yesterday. We were going to be annihilated. I can tell you from personal experience. Really. It's a real story. The day before the war, I thought that I'm about to see my death in the next few days because the war was going to take place. Seeing on television and radio all these masses of Arab armies amassing on Israel was mind-boggling. Seeing all this Egyptian army crossing the Suez Canal, coming to Israel, and Abdul Nasser saying to the United Nations, get out of here, so you're not a buffer, not that there ever been a buffer, but tells them to get out of there, and they did. And we are just, it was it. an anecdote. They were trying to cheer us, so they bought some movies for us to see because the whole country was in a state of readiness for about a month. Nobody worked. People that were in pension already, that retired for years and years, went to replace people that now are sitting with guns ready for an attack. The country came to a standstill. Kids worked in bakeries. Old people went back to work because all men were involved in protecting the country. I remember the day before the war, we were watching a movie in my area. They came to cheer us up, I guess, a movie. You know what was the name of the movie? Dr. Strangelove.
Or how I learned to start.
Well, anyways, the next day there was the war. I think, John, you asked me what was Latrun during the war. Latrun in 1948 was the most fearful, was the most terrible battlefield. I was very near Latrun in the 6 Days War. There was no resistance. Jordanians went away. In Egypt, we took the entire Sinai Peninsula. You know what the size of the Sinai Peninsula is? It's 3 times the size of Israel. And we took the Golan Heights. Not the area that you saw today. We took a much larger area in 1967, which, with the agreement later after the Yom Kippur War, we, for whatever reason, we decided to give back to them, and it became a very peaceful border. But what happened later on? The Fatah came in. The national ideas all of a sudden came. All of a sudden Al-Aqsa, that nobody ever came on a pilgrimage to. None came from the other side of the borders ever to Al-Aqsa. All of a sudden everybody needs to have a pilgrimage to Al-Aqsa. It's the place, the most important, second holy to Islam. Where were you before 1967? It was open, it was yours. Well, many mistakes were made, and we'll talk about it when we're there. But what I'm trying to establish here, that all these ideas about nationality and land and country and a flag, didn't exist before. Did not exist before. And all of a sudden it became the most important thing. The whole world peace depends now on peace between Israel and the Palestinians. I don't want to say thank God for 9/11, because God forbid I should ever say that, but it opened the eyes of the world, that it's not Israel and the Palestinians. It's the entire world against Islam.
Yes.
And that's the issue. And that's the issue. So, if 100 years ago you asked the Palestinians, so-called, quote-unquote Palestinians, who are you? They would say we were Iraqians, or Syrians, or Lebanese. And all of a sudden, there's an entity. And we allowed it to happen. Now, why? Why did Israel allow it to happen? Well, what happened in World War II? Germany was made to drop to her knees. Japan was made to drop to her knees. Israel was never been able to be in a position to get their enemies down to their knees. I can tell you that in the 1973 war, in Yom Kippur War, we came today from Emek Abacha, from the Valley of Tears. I was in Egypt. I was 60 kilometers from Alexandria. I was stopped. We were faking, we don't hear the radio transmission because we didn't want to stop. We already smelled the victory. Who made us stop? United States of America. So the thing is that you have to really understand the entire scope of things to understand what the problems are. But the thing is, it's a manufactured situation. Just the same as the liberals in the United States say that there's no problem in the border with Mexico, It's a manufactured. It's really manufactured here. There's no problem. There's really none. It's clear cut. There's no question about what's going on. But the world interfered throughout history, from 3,500 years ago already. And it never stops. And it's still there.